Well, good morning. What a blessing to be with so many friends. God bless the great state of New Hampshire. I'm thrilled to be back up here with so many friends. Thank you for being here. You know, I spent all week in Washington, D.C. So it is great to be back in America. It's been kind of an interesting week in Washington. Last week, Pope Francis was in town. It was truly an incredible experience to sit on the House floor, to listen to the Pope address a joint session of Congress. I will have to admit, though, the day before the press conference at the White House was kind of awkward. Every time the reporters addressed a question to Your Holiness, Obama would answer. Well, and then the next day, President Xi of China was in Washington to meet with the president. Media outlets all across the world reported on this momentous meeting between the world's most powerful communist and the president of China. You know, we're here this morning because our country's in crisis. We're bankrupting our kids and grandkids. Our constitutional rights are under assault each and every day. And America has receded from leadership in the world, and it's made the world a much more dangerous place. But I'm here this morning with a word of hope and encouragement and exhortation. All across this country, people are waking up. Something incredible is happening, and I'm here to tell you right now, help is on the way. So I want to ask everyone here to look forward. Look forward to January 2017. If I'm elected president, let me tell you what I intend to do on the first day in office. The first thing I intend to do is to rescind every single illegal and unconstitutional executive action the president likes to say he's got a phone and he's got a pen. Well, you live by the phone and the pen, you die by the phone and the pen. And my pen has got an eraser. But sadly, the corruption's not been limited to the White House. The second thing I intend to do is instruct the U.S. Department of Justice to open an investigation into Planned Parenthood and these horrible videos. And to prosecute any and all criminal violations by that organization. The administration of justice should be blind to party or ideology. The only fidelity at the Department of Justice should be to the laws and the Constitution of the United States of America. The third thing I intend to do on the first day in office is instruct the Department of Justice and the IRS and every other federal agency that the persecution of religious liberty ends today. That means that every serviceman and woman has the right to seek out and worship the Lord God Almighty with all of their hearts, minds, and souls, and their supervising officer has nothing to say about it. That means that the little sisters of the poor, a Catholic charity being persecuted by the Obama administration will find that the case against them has been dismissed. The fourth thing I intend to do on the first day in office is rip to shreds this catastrophic Iranian nuclear deal. The single greatest national security threat facing America is the threat of a nuclear Iran, and as Commander-in-Chief, I will make abundantly clear that a nation led by a theocratic zealot who chants death to America will never be allowed to possess nuclear weapons. The fifth thing I intend to do on the first day in office is begin the process of moving the American embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, the once and eternal capital of Israel. That's day one. There are 365 days in a year, 4 years in a presidential term, and 4 years in a second term. By the end of 8 years, there are going to be a whole lot of journalists and editors and reporters who've checked themselves into therapy. In the days that follow, I will go to Congress, and we will repeal every word of Obamacare. In the days that follow, I will instruct the U.S. Department of Education, which should be abolished. I will instruct the Department of Education that Common Core ends today. In the days that follow, we will rebuild the military, and we will honor the commitments made to our soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines. And we will protect the right to keep and bear arms of our servicemen and women. That means the next time a jihadist walks into a recruiting center in Chattanooga, he's going to encounter the business end of firearms wielded by a dozen Marines. In the days that follow, we will finally secure the borders and end sanctuary cities. We will stop releasing violent, criminal, illegal aliens, and we will pass Kate's Law. In the days that follow, we will take on the EPA. And the CFPB, and the alphabet soup of federal agencies that has descended like locusts, strangling small businesses and killing jobs. In the days that follow, we will pass fundamental tax reform. We will pass a simple, flat tax. Where every American can fill out his or her taxes on a postcard. And when we do that, we should abolish the IRS. There are about 90,000 employees at the IRS. We need to padlock that building. Take all 90,000 and put them down on our southern border. Now, to our friends in the media, I say that somewhat tongue-in-cheek. But if you think about it, imagine, sir, you traveled thousands of miles in the blazing heat. You're swimming across the Rio Grande. And the first thing you see is 90,000 IRS agents. You turn around and go home, too. some of y'all may be thinking, all of this makes sense. It's basic common sense. Live within your means. Don't bankrupt our kids and grandkids. Follow the Constitution. But can it happen? Can we do it? You know, Scripture tells us there's nothing new under the sun. I think where we are today is very, very much like the late 1970s. Same failed economic policies. Same misery, stagnation, and malaise. Same feckless and naive foreign policy. In fact, the very same countries, Russia and Iran, openly laughing at and mocking the President of the United States. Now, why is it that analogy gives me so much hope and optimism? Because we know how that story ended. The late 1970s and 1980, all across this country, millions of men and women rose up and became the Reagan Revolution. And it didn't come from Washington. Washington despised Ronald Reagan. By the way, if you see a candidate who Washington embraces, run and hide. It came from the American people, and it turned this country around. We went from economic stagnation to booming growth, millions lifted into prosperity and the American dream. We went from our hostages languishing in Iran to winning the Cold War and tearing the Berlin Wall to the ground. Why am I so optimistic? Because the same thing is happening again. All across this country, people are waking up. I got to tell you, the energy, the enthusiasm, the momentum this campaign is experiencing is breathtaking. Listen, the Washington establishment, they have a plan. They want conservatives divided. They want us splintered. They want some conservatives over here. They want some evangelicals over here. They want some libertarians over here. They want some Tea Party folks over here. That's how a moderate establishment candidate runs up the middle with 24% of the vote. Steals the nomination, and if that happens, the same millions of conservatives who stayed home in 08 and 12 stay home in 16, and Hillary Clinton is the next president of the United States. How do we stop it? It's real simple. Conservatives come together. If we stand together as one, if conservatives unite, this primary is over. And if conservatives unite and we energize and speak to the people of faith, to the 54 million evangelical Christians who stayed home in 2012, to the Reagan Democrats, the blue-collar Catholics, who are getting hammered by the Obama economy. If we bring those voters back on common sense principles, standing for the free market principles and the constitutional liberties that built America, that is how we turn this country around. And that's what's happening. It's happening here in New Hampshire. It's happening all over the country. There is an awakening, there is a revival that is sweeping this nation. I want to close with this. For all of us, freedom isn't some abstract concept. It's real, it's personal in our families. You know, I think of my dad, Pastor Raphael Cruz. Many of y'all have gotten to know my father. 58 years ago, my dad fled Cuba. He'd been imprisoned. He'd been tortured. And he came to America with nothing, with $100 in his underwear. He washed dishes making 50 cents an hour to pay his way through school. He and my mom came together to start a small business. Today, my dad is a pastor. He travels the country preaching the gospel. Now, my whole life, my dad has been my hero. But I'll tell you what my father told me over and over again when I was a child. He said, when I faced oppression in Cuba, I had a place to flee to. if we lose our freedom here, where do we go? That is why all of us are here today. We are here because every one of us in the core of our being believe in live free or die. You know, the word tells us that weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. I'm here to tell you, morning is coming. Morning is coming. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. If you have a question, if you could write it down on a card and hold it up, I'll come over to you. We have one question, Senator Cruz. Before we get to that, though, I think there's some very special guests here you may want to introduce. I happen to see them come in.
There are indeed. I'm very proud to introduce my best friend in the whole world, my wife, Heidi. And our two little girls, Caroline and Catherine, who are 7 and 4. Caroline, wave, sweetie.
Nice. Thank you for joining us. So the first question, Senator.
And I will make a quick observation. I am so grateful our girls look like their mother.
I think a lot of fathers are. There is a direct relationship between the government and the people, where you see effects of the D.C. dysfunction in all aspects of government, even locally. How, as president, will you reestablish an atmosphere of bipartisanship?
You know, Washington is broken right now. And it's broken because I've said many times the biggest divide we've got politically is not between Democrats and Republicans. The biggest divide we have politically is between career politicians in Washington in both parties and the American people. I wrote a book a couple of months ago called A Time for Truth, where I talked about what I call the Washington cartel. The Washington politicians that get in bed with lobbyists and special interests and grow and grow and grow government. And if we're going to turn around what's wrong in Washington, we've got to have leaders willing to take on the Washington cartel. Now, we've seen how to do that. Now, it's interesting. The Republican primary, there are a whole lot of candidates talking about taking on Washington. In that last debate, you had 11 candidates standing on that stage talking about they're going to take on Washington. I think the natural next question is, okay, great. Show me when you've ever actually done so. And I don't have to point back to 2013 when I was leading the fight against Obamacare. Or to 2014 when I was leading the fight against President Obama's illegal and unconstitutional executive action. But I can point to this past week. You know, every candidate on that stage said they oppose funding Planned Parenthood. And they oppose the Iran deal. Well, this past week in Washington, I've been leading the fight to stop Planned Parenthood funding and to stop the Iran deal. And I have a simple question for the other very fine men and women running for the Republican nomination. Where were they? Not a single one of them showed up for that fight. I would have loved to have seen 11 Republican candidates for president showing up in Washington and saying, Mitch McConnell and John Boehner don't fund Planned Parenthood. And yet not a one of them was there. And you want an example. How do you break the Washington cartel? The best example we've seen is in 1980, the Reagan Revolution, that came from the American people, stood up to Washington and changed the path we're on That's how we change Washington, is it's got to come from we the people.
Excellent. Thank you, Senator. So I'll get to as many of these questions as we can. Next question comes, what would you do to devolve power back to the states?
A fantastic question. You know, the simplest and best answer is follow the Constitution. Listen, I am passionate about the Constitution going back to literally when I was a child. As a teenager, I was part of a group called the Constitutional Corroborators that memorized the Constitution in short mnemonic form. In college, I wrote my senior thesis on the 9th and 10th Amendments to the Constitution. Before I was in the Senate, I founded and led the Center for 10th Amendment Studies at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. You look at the 10th Amendment, what it says. You know, I'm actually reminded, I'll give you a great illustration of what the 10th Amendment says. A couple of weeks ago, I was on the Stephen Colbert Show. Not exactly a friendly forum for conservatives. I actually asked my team if they never saw me again to please send in the search and rescue teams. But, you know, the first few minutes with Colbert, we joked, we had some fun. And then Colbert's politics are not hard to figure out. He immediately jumps in, gay marriage, what's wrong with Republicans on gay marriage? And my response was very simple. I said, listen, under the Constitution, gay marriage is a question for the states. Now, Colbert's audience, being Colbert's audience, immediately begins booing. Now, to Colbert's credit, he actually asked them, look, he's my guest, don't boo him. And Colbert responded and said, but Ted, marriage is found nowhere in the Constitution. And I turned to him and said, Stephen, exactly. And if it ain't in the Constitution, under the 10th Amendment, it's a question for the states to decide. And then I turned to the audience and I said, look, why would y'all want 5 unelected lawyers in Washington deciding every important public policy issue? If you care about an issue, convince your fellow citizens. Let's have 320 million Amerians decide at the ballot box. That's called democracy. And here's the important point. That same audience that a minute ago had booed burst into applause at that, and we got a louder round of applause than the boos had been, because when you speak the truth with a smile, it moves people's hearts and minds.
All right, so this is the last question. For those of you who submitted questions that I didn't get to, I am going to hand this off to Senator Cruz staff so they have an opportunity to look at them. And if they have a chance to answer them later on other venues, they can do that as well. Very quickly, Senator, could you please expand on your flat tax proposal?
Absolutely. You know, right now, America spends about $500 billion on tax compliance, on lawyers, on accountants, on paperwork. It's all deadweight loss. That's about what we spend on our entire military budget. But as we like to say in Texas, it doesn't produce a single truck or tortilla. If we move to a flat tax, a simple flat tax. Now, I have not yet rolled out a specific rate and details. In the coming weeks and months, we will roll out a precise plan. What I have said is that it needs to be simple, flat, fair, apply to everyone, and be on a postcard. And actually, the most important factor of that is the postcard. Now, why is that? Because there are limits to physics. Look, what politicians love to do is add complexity. Here's how the most important reason for a flat tax is not the incredible economic growth it will generate, although that's hugely important. The most important reason is that it disempowers politicians in Washington. Why is that? Right now, here's how Washington works. A small businessman goes down to Washington, meets with his or her congressman. The elected member of Congress puts his arm around him and says, you know, a small businessman says, can you help me out? The member of Congress says, sure. We can carve out a special provision in the tax code just for you. By the way, I've got a fundraiser on Tuesday. You're going to be there, right? And it's fundamentally corrupt. Do you know there are more words in the IRS code than there are in the Bible? Because it's filled with this carve-out and that carve-out, and it's how politicians shake down the private sector. Under a flat tax, the great thing is if you got a postcard, there's no more room on the postcard. And that means when someone goes to Washington, their member of Congress has to say, look, you're paying the same tax rate as everybody else. You just got to build a better mousetrap. And what that does is it takes power out of Washington and it brings it back to the private sector, to the citizenry where it belongs.
Very good. That's all we have time for, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, Senator Ted Cruz.
Thank you, and God bless you.